Hi everyone, I'm Alex West, author and co-host of the Faculty of Horror podcast, and this is Bucky.
Woof.
Welcome back to Sympathy for the Sequel here on RUE MORGUE TV. In this series, we look at the biggest franchises in horror and do a deep dive into the lowest rated entry according to Rotten Tomatoes. By examining its production history and reception, we aim to uncover how this film got that distinction, and we try to highlight at least a few redeeming qualities about it. Today, we're talking about a franchise where the original film is so iconic, so important to cinema, that it overshadows all the entries that came after it, except the third.
Jesus Christ!
Yes, the third is a good movie with an incredible jump scare, we all know. But we're not talking about a good movie. We're not even talking about a bad movie. We're talking about two bad movies. In today's episode, we're talking about Exorcist II, The Heretic from 1977 and Exorcist the Beginning from 2004. That's right, for the first time ever in Sympathy for the Sequel's esteemed history, we have a tie for worst in the franchise. And as your hosts, I watched them both, and I think they're both worth talking about. Let's start with the first one to hit screens, which is John Boorman's exploration of things and stuff and tap dance and locusts, Exorcist II, The Heretic, which has 10% on Rotten Tomatoes.
4 years ago, The Exorcist shocked the world. Now, the struggle between good and evil goes on.
Christopher Porterfield of Time magazine writes, "Here, we are spared many a Friedkin's cheap shocks, the mutilations, the vomiting, the bestiality, but what remains is twaddle." Vincent Canby of the New York Times writes, "There had to be a sequel, but did it have to be this desperate concoction, the main thrust of which is that original exorcism wasn't all it was cracked up to be?"
Linda Blair, Richard Burton, Louise Fletcher, Max von Sydow, James Earl Jones. Exorcist II, The Heretic.
Set a few years after the events of the original film, Exorcist II, The Heretic follows a teenage Regan McNeil as she does hypnotherapy and tap dance in New York City. Father Lamont is investigating a posthumous heresy accusation against Father Marin due to the McNeil exorcism and the church not wanting to acknowledge the existence of the devil. Yeah, right, Bucky?
Woof.
When Lamont comes to New York to question Regan, her physician, Dr. Tuscan, insists they use the synchronizer, a biofeedback device used to synchronize the brainwaves of two people. Pazuzu, the demon who possessed Regan, infiltrates the procedure, and Lamont learns of a young African boy named Kakumo, who repelled Pazuzu, and that Pazuzu appears in the form of swarms of locusts. Also, Kakumo and Regan share special healing abilities and are apparently the next step in human evolution. Lamont and Regan go back to Georgetown. Tuscan and Sharon from the first film, follow them. Sharon is possessed, and then a bunch of action happens really quickly, including sexy Regan doppelganger trying to seduce Lamont.
No. Kill her.
And it all ends in a heart being ripped out and Regan doing this and banishing the locusts. And finally, Lamont and Regan go off together at Tuscan's behest, like some kind of QAnon child trafficking fever dream.
I understand now.
Exorcist II, The Heretic remains a true curio of Hollywood lore. With none of the creative team returning from the first film, Warner Brothers went back to John Boorman, who they'd approached to originally direct the first film. The spectrum of Boorman's filmmaking ranges from one of the all-time great thrillers in Deliverance to whatever the fuck Zardoz was.
The gun is good.
The gun is good.
The penis
is evil.
You also have Richard Burton, an incredibly celebrated actor, struggling through this film as he struggled with a lot of personal issues off-set. Linda Blair is back, but refused to wear the heavy prosthetics and demon makeup, so basically you've got designer imposter Demon Reagan.
Once the wings have brushed you, you're mine forever.
Louise Fletcher had just won an Oscar for playing Nurse Ratched in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and frankly lends a lot of class while talking about brainwaves with a straight face.
Mental illness, that's what we're up against here. Or if you like, the casualties of a diseased society.
The film has a lot of ambition, but it just isn't grounded in anything. The Heretic is about metaphysical consciousness and locus and psychic abilities, I think. A lot happens in this movie, and a lot of it doesn't make sense. The mental effects of watching this film are akin to drinking a 6-pack of expired beer. You feel nauseous, you're uncertain of your surroundings, and you're not sure why you started it to begin with. But the film is, to quote Father Lamont, utterly horrible and fascinating. This is a film that had one of the most iconic blueprints to work off of and completely threw it out. And in theory, I think it's better to do that than to remake the original. So what are some genuinely good things about it? Well, it's so weird.
If Bozuzu comes for you, I will spit a leopard.
It is hard to make something this weird, and with all the algorithm-driven Hollywood stuff going on right now, it remains a true outlier, and I have a hard time imagining something this deeply strange not only getting made, but released by a major studio ever again. And then, of course, the scene where Lamont is getting stoned, like literal people throwing stones at him, while Reagan tap dances, and because she's psychic, she feels the impact of the rocks, causing an abrupt end to the performance, and I just wish more amateur dance recitals ended like that. Now, what other film could possibly be as lowly rated as Exorcist II, The Heretic? Well, Rennie Harlin said, "Hold my beer," and made Exorcist the Beginning in 2004. Before we get into that film, we have to talk about the absolute studio debacle that yielded two competing Exorcist prequels. In 2002, Paul Schrader, screenwriter of Taxi Driver, directed what would become Dominion prequel to The Exorcist. Morgan Creek, the studio behind the film, was distraught over the lack of scares in early cuts of the film, and a back and forth over the creative control of the film ensued. Eventually, the reins of the production were handed over to Rennie Harlin, who, after cutting his teeth on films like A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, and then later on to films like Cliffhanger, The Long Kiss Goodnight, and Deep Blue Sea, he was a good choice because he was really used to the studio system. Harlan's version, which would become known as Exorcist the Beginning, kept only Stellan Skarsgård as young Father Merrin and the skeleton of the plot from Schrader's version. The end result is a Rennie Harlin film. It's fast-paced, lots of action with some dodgy special effects. I mean, what more do you want? Now, if you've seen any other Sympathy for the sequels, you'll know I love knees up stupidity. I dug Exorcist the Beginning. It's more watchable than Heretic and way less self-serious than Dominion, which was eventually released after Exorcist the Beginning underperformed at the box office. So you too can watch both versions if you're so curious. Harlan's version of Merrin's origin story sees him as a kind of drunk Indiana Jones running from a past encounter with the Nazis at the end of World War II that still haunts him. He's asked by a collector to go to Kenya, which at the time was under British colonial rule, to retrieve a mysterious artifact. The rest of the film essentially details why Merrin shits his pants at seeing the statue of Pazuzu at the beginning of The Exorcist. The film features a lot of pseudo-Christian mythology with some pretty fun derivations, with a church being built on top of this site where Lucifer was believed to fall to Earth. And this site then becomes a hotbed for evil and bad CGI. Is it a groundbreaking original work? No. Is it a film that addressed a lot of basic studio notes while having a bit of fun while doing it? Yes. I personally think the lore between these two competing prequels would make a great film or book or miniseries or something on its own, and I would love to see that. But until then, let's highlight some good things about Exorcist the Beginning. Stellan Skarsgård.
What legend?
There's a reason why he's the only thing in both films, and he's a great actor. Always happy to see him when he shows up in a film. And I will say, while watching Dominion, I was like, is Stellan Skarsgård a babe? While watching this film, I was like, oh yeah, he's a babe. This film, babe certifies celebrated actor Stellan Skarsgård.
Stellan Skarsgård, certified babe.
Isabella Scorupco, also a babe.
Thank you.
Big babe movie. Now, the big possession set piece at the end of the film, which a lot of people dunk on, feels actually to me more in line with something out of The Evil Dead. And you know what? I enjoyed it. It was fun. I had fun. And finally, our hero walks not into the sunset, but into the worst green screen backdrop of Rome I have ever seen, and it is one of the funniest final shots in any film ever. So that's our episode on the Exorcist franchise. Let us know what you think in the comments, and if you haven't already, please like and subscribe. And until next time, we'll see you in the sequel.